I have always loved reading, writing, drawing, reading comics, etc., etc. So basically that's where it came from. I remember sort of, being very much of a bookworm when I was a kid. I never learned how to swim because I would much prefer sitting down on the beach, on the rocks and reading books. I still remember going to the library in Floriana and the guys there say, okay, the guy from Ormy's back. And I would read, a book a day? Sometimes two, because that was the way I was made. I'm a bookworm. And anybody who is that much of a bookworm is going to write. And so I used to write one novel every summer holidays, just for the fun of it. I also read comics. My dad was literate. He wasn't aware of the stigma around comics. People said that comics have bad English, etc., etc. So he bought me comics. And that made me love drawing. And I used to sit at my mum's tabletop, which was white Formica, with a pencil and just drawing these, wonderful, fantastic scenarios on it, and then just rubbing them off and, ready for the next set of scenarios. Maltese was Maltese was my language. As I said, both mom and dad didn't speak English. I learned English at primary school and then onwards. I've always been into languages, English, Maltese, and I've always been into literature. I don't make a distinction, actually. I mean, for me, it all depends on what the feeling is of the piece I'm actually doing. My poetry either comes out in English or in Maltese. I have most of my books, both for the adults and for children, in Maltese, except for one. So it's constant. I love the sound of the Maltese language. The Maltese language has this incredible, sound to it that is unique to Maltese. The romance, tinge, lilt, but at the same time there's the guttural roughness of the Semitic bass, which is so wonderful, and they mix so wonderfully together. In fact, I've always loved onomatopoeia. And even in my children's books, I'm always experimenting with sounds, etc., etc. Recently, my ex-wife and I translated a book from Swedish directly into Maltese for children. I had to invent words in it because the Swedish words were invented, so I had to invent Maltese words that corresponded in a sense. And that was the most fun I've had in years. I mean, I was born and bred in Malta. Okay, I've lived in Sweden, I've studied in the UK, I suppose been all over the place. But I'm a tree that might have spread its branches all over the place, but the roots are definitely firmly in the ground, in the Maltese ground. And I actually come from Ormy, which is a very, very traditional Maltese village. I draw on all my experiences from all over the world. But if you were to boil it down, you'd find that everything refers to some aspect of Malta. Of Maltese life, of the uniqueness of being Maltese, of the passion of being, Southern Mediterranean, of the need to fill every corner of every space with something, because that's the way we are, of shouting out loud instead of actually just talking, the jerking of our hands, the jerking of our heads as we talk. All of that is what makes my characters. In spite of it being a massively flawed country, with massively flawed people, I think it'll remain the love of my life. Well, I'm actually best known for my writing for children, even though, on the other hand, I'm also best known for my cartoons. But predominantly, I'm known as a children's book writer and illustrator. So I love writing for children because there are no holds bars. It's wonderful. I mean, the point is, in the end, writing for children is much more difficult than writing for adults, for a very simple reason, because, as you can imagine, I'm not a child. But you do need to get into the mindset of a child when you're writing, that sense of fantasy, that sense of adventure, that sense of wonder, which then needs to be translated into the writing, which also needs to be the language used by children. So all of this is quite difficult, but fun. A new book has just come out for children, which is a sequel to a bestseller, actually, I'm very happy to say, which was the Professor Asfour. Now we have a Professor Asfour for Spazio. And it's just one of those fun things where, these inventions, these incredible inventions, and of course, there's an attack by aliens, isn't there always? My children's book in English, which is Sigurd and the Bow of Life, is about Scandinavia. I lived in Sweden for many years, part-time there, part-time here. I loved the atmosphere of the woods and the forests there. And of course, I loved the little elves. You know, they parade them out in Christmas time, etc. And I was drawing them constantly. And the book came out of that. It's one of those things. Yeah, books come out of nowhere. But then there's also my writing for adults. I write verse, I won't say poetry, although my verse is very sentimental and very emotional. I only write, you know, about the wonderful times in my life and the most horrible times in my life. So it's quite lyrical. But there's also the short stories, the micro stories that have only just been published. It's about life. It's stories that are 200 words long, so can be read in 2.5 minutes roughly. I illustrated each of them, which is a no-no actually, because adult writing should not be illustrated. But I broke that rule because I wanted to continue what was in the 200 words also through the visual medium. So it's 100 stories about everything, about rape, about stalking, about pedophilia, about depression, alcoholism. They are real life people going through the throes of life. So a lot of the contexts are new and original to me. The feeling of fear, the feeling of grief, the feeling of being so much in a dark place that you can't even lift your head. That's what comes from me. If the right things are out there, people will read them. You know, we're often commenting about how the Maltese don't read. Well, the Maltese maybe don't read because they haven't been shown how much fun it is. Like all writers, I suppose, I do tend to pour my emotions into my writing and to my paintings. I'm afraid my second divorce was quite a nasty one, and it hit me where it hurts, literally. Basically, I was destroyed, and I had to find some way of actually picking myself up again. And the only way I could do that was by expressing myself. I actually started painting my Rhapsody in Pain series, which actually went on to become an exhibition. I manifested it in that way. They're emotions writ large in full color with writhing figures and, you know, backgrounds that sort of speak millions basically. But there's also the writing. And I found that the only way I could actually come to terms with what I was feeling was by putting it down on paper. And I wrote 5 blogs actually where I tried to explore what it was I was feeling, which many people thought was very brave. You know, a man talking about his feelings, that was unheard of. You know, men should just man up, sit in a corner and cry alone. You know, that's the way it should be. But I said no. I said I want this out there. There's also a bit of selfish gratification and feeling that you've helped other people, which is absolutely wonderful. I am a communicator. I mean, I'm a professor of communications. That is my job. But it's not just my job. It's who I am.